Hey everyone, welcome back to Reissued. If you're new here, my name is Andrew. If you're not new here, you know that taking items from the thrift store or sometimes the trash and turning them into unique one-of-a-kind finds is kind of what we do here on the channel. So today we are returning to the mothership with some home decor thrift flips. We're going to be transforming a vintage chair and a little modern industrial side table and giving them a nice mashup of modern and vintage styles. Now, you know I like to make things complicated, and we will make things complicated in this video, but the core ideas here are super simple, something that anybody can do. So I can't wait to get started today. Let's start flipping. Now, before we get started today, if you like this video and want to see more thrift flips, be sure to hit the like button. Also, be sure that you're subscribed so that you can see how I incorporate these items into my living room makeover down the line. And finally, I'm going to link all the products and the materials that I use for these projects down in the description box. So if you want to take on one of these projects, be sure to check that out. Okay, so let's start with this vintage chair that I got at Goodwill a couple of years ago for $50. I loved the cane detail and the high back on this, so I picked it up and it's been sitting in limbo at my house for ages. I was originally going to reupholster it entirely, but that's a tall order given the complex tufting, and the upholstery is in great shape other than the fact that it's very faded. I actually don't mind this kind of faded pink shade, but somehow this feels like it's one step away from popping a doily on the headrest and taking this to grandma's house, and not in a good way. I think we need to change this up somehow. You can see in the cracks here that this actually used to be a flaming hot pink shade before it got bleached out by the sun. So that got me thinking that rather than taking all the fabric off this and reupholstering, we could work with the fabric that's here and take it back to a shade that's more in line with the original color. Maybe not hot pink for my house, but something equally vibrant and warm. First, we need to choose a shade to dye this, and I'm thinking that this chair would work great in the living room, kind of by the fireplace. And since we're doing a lot of blue shades and warm wood tones in that space, I think a rusty orange color would be a great shade to shoot for. So I went onto REISSUED's website and selected the shade Preserved Amber as a gold shade for this chair. Keep in mind that we're not starting from white here, so it might be hard to kind of predict the outcome of the color, but I do think that the existing pink undertones here will shift really nicely into an orange place. Just be sure that if you're trying to dye an existing piece that you keep in mind the existing undertones of the original fabric and try to move just like one step on the color wheel. Yellow to green, green to blue, that kind of thing. With my color recipe selected, I purchased all-purpose REISSUED dyes in the shades Tangerine and Wine. I only ended up needing one bottle of each, and I didn't even use it all for this project. I have a dedicated dye pot, but not measuring cups, so I made a makeshift measuring jar by adding an 1/8 cup of water at a time and marking the lines on the side. I followed the manufacturer's instructions to mix the dye. I wasn't sure how much to make, so I cut the recipe in half by mixing 1.5 gallons of hot water with an 1/8 cup of wine and 1/2 cup of tangerine. Now, you'll notice by the end of this video that a lot of these projects happened in my kitchen. Some because they had to be in the kitchen, and others because my studio is such a mess, so it's like basically unusable. So with my kitchen full of projects, there wasn't much room left there for cooking, which is why I'm so happy to be getting my meals from Home Chef, which is the sponsor of today's video. Home Chef is making my cooking simpler and faster since all the ingredients I need for a recipe are shipped right to my door. Lately, I've been cutting down on prep time and cleanup time even more by getting their oven-ready meals. I just combine a few ingredients in the included oven-safe tin and pop it right in the oven. The recipe cards are clear and concise and have lots of photos, often with optional instructions for changing up the recipe to fit your needs. These walnut shrimp tostadas got even easier to make and to eat with their little tip for converting them into soft tacos instead. I also love that their ingredients are super fresh and come in the proper proportions for the recipe. I don't need a massive bunch of cilantro from the grocery store to go bad in my fridge, but that little added fresh flavor makes all the difference when it comes to taste. So head over to the link in my description to get 50% off and free shipping on your first box with code REISSUED50. When half of your kitchen is covered in projects, keep your cooking simple with Home Chef. Okay, back to dyeing. Once I mixed my dye and heated the water to just below boiling, I could add in a little dish soap, followed by the dye. Mix it together, and we're ready to get this on the chair. In preparation for this project, I watched 2 really helpful videos on dyeing upholstered furniture. One person applied the dye with the brush, and the other applied it with a sprayer. I'm gonna apply the dye with the brush here for ease and accessibility. As I brush on the dye, I try to fully saturate the fabric and work roughly in one area at a time to avoid hard lines. That became tricky when I dripped across the seat and had to start there as well. I don't think it really mattered in the end because I managed to saturate the chair enough and blend things out. During the process, I tried both the bristle brush and a sponge brush. Both worked okay, but in the end, I preferred the bristle brush to work the dye into the fibers, especially when it came to pushing the dye into the tough areas. The cracks between the tufts and the sides behind the cane were really tough to get into, but I wanted to be sure that I dyed every part of the chair so that this would be as convincing as possible. As I went, I kept a paper towel on hand to wipe the dye off the wood. We don't want that turning orange. Once I got everything coated, I left it to dry in the sun. And I think the color looks pretty good. I wanted to see if I could make the color a little bit darker, so I opted to reheat my dye and go back in for another coat a couple days later. And this was a total waste of time because it looked exactly the same after. I really think that if I wanted a deeper color here, I could remix the dye with less water to make the pigment more saturated, or I could add a little bit of black or brown dyes to the mixture to desaturate the color and deepen it. In this case, I'm going with it. I'm happy with how it looks. It's maybe a bit more vibrant than I was expecting, but we're gonna go with it and hope that that works with the room. After leaving it to dry again, I rinsed the chair off with the hose to remove any excess dye. I think this was necessary for my chair since there were so many cushy areas and folds for the excess dye to hang out, but I've seen other people choose not to rinse at all. And as a final step here, I've seen a lot of people use a color fixative to set the color. I bought it for this project, but honestly, at the end of the day, I was so tired of taking this chair in and out and waiting for dry times and whatever, so I did not put a color fixative on this chair. I still have it on hand, so maybe I'll do it at some point down the line, but for now, I'm not noticing any color transfer, so I hope it's gonna be okay. So one thrift flip down. Now, before we do the table flip, let's do a little bonus here. If you watched my recent thrift haul video, I got this wreath at Goodwill for $8. It has these little wood shavings that are made into flowers, which I think is such a cool take on a spring look. But I mentioned in that video that I was not loving these little green paper leaves that were attached, and literally everyone agreed with me in the comments, so we're gonna take those off. This was trickier than I'd hoped since they were glued to the back of the wood flowers, which are quite fragile. So I found that the best method was to try to just tear them away and then go in with scissors to cut away any remaining bits. The result is not perfect, but it's the best I could hope for without totally wrecking the wood flowers. In the places that I did wreck the wood flowers, I whipped out the hot glue gun to make some repairs. Now let's hang this up and make the transition to spring finally. Okay, so for the final thrift flip, this is one that is so simple in technique and theory, but that I pushed to the absolute limit of overcomplication. So don't be scared, you can do this. So I got this little metal end table a while back, like a couple years ago at the REISSUED store for $25, I think. I always knew that I would have to rework the top since the wood is kind of water stained and unfinished. I was originally thinking that I was gonna do tile, but I've done that a lot now and I hate doing the same thing over and over again, so let's do something different. So I thought it would be cool to do kind of a vintage wood inlay look to give a touch of dark academia to this very modern piece and to make it work with my living room vibes. I've seen people do this as a border on their wood floors by taping off a design and going in with different shades of wood stain, but I know from experience that painting with stain can tend to bleed a little bit, making the lines not super crisp, which might be okay for a larger scale design, but this tabletop is quite small, and I think I want the design to be pretty small and intricate as well to match that, so I don't think that painting with stain is going to be the right method here. So then I thought that I would buy a pre-made wood inlay and chisel out a little border along the edge and lay that in. I did actually go to a specialty wood shop to pick this up, and I asked someone there about the kind of chisel to use or what they thought, and basically they were like, the only way to do that is with the router. You can't do that. And I can't really describe the visceral reaction of rage that that brought out in me. It was kind of surprising to me at the time. I've had a couple days to unpack that. There's just something, one, I don't like to be told that I can't do something. Two, I don't like to feel underestimated. Three, I just have this feeling sometimes, like, don't get me wrong, I think there's a time and a place where there is a right way to do something. You know, like if you're pulling apart your house and you notice like a shabby construction job, a DIY job gone bad that happened in the past, like there are correct ways to do things. I know when it comes to very high quality art and craft that there is a right way to do something, and I have a lot of respect for that. However, at the same time, I think one of the great joys of my life and my channel is finding ways to do things in an alternative way. And I guess I've just been coming up against this energy lately of me choosing to thrift something or choosing to do it my way for what feels within my skill set and my budget is less than like, oh, you should just go buy that from the store, or you should have all these tools, or you should do these things. And while I always want to take feedback and try to do things the right way, that's not always achievable for everybody, especially in this economy. We're all just out here doing the best we can, man. So we will not be using a router, and I did not end up purchasing anything from that store. I walked out empty-handed. So now I have no wood inlay. So we are gonna hack this with some iron-on wood veneer banding that I had in my drawer already. We're gonna work with what we have. So this is 3/4 inch birch veneer banding that I got on Amazon a while back. I bought this for the IKEA Sandvidal blind hack that's in my bedroom. That's holding up great. I still love how it looks, but I had a lot of this left over, and so we're gonna work with that today. So the idea here is that we're gonna cut up this banding into a bunch of tiny pieces, stain them in different colors, and do kind of a mosaic situation on the top. So again, this process could be super easy, but because I'm me and because I have something to prove, we're gonna make this super complicated. For the design, again, I wanted something really small scale and intricate to work with the scale of the table, but I was looking for inspiration in a lot of Victorian wood floor designs, the borders that they put around the corner, the parquet inlays in the middle. So with that in mind, I created a little design on my computer by measuring my table and dividing it up into 1/8 inch squares. Since that's the smallest measurement I think I could cut without going crazy, I added a table to my slide in Keynote with those 1/8 inch increments and filled the cells in with different colors to play around with the design. You could definitely do this with graph paper as well. I don't have graph paper on hand right now. Once I had a working design for 1/4 of the table, I felt confident enough that this was gonna work, and I got to cutting. Cutting the strips was definitely the hardest part of this process, so my mom jumped in to help me make these cuts. For my design, I needed a combination of 1/8 inch strips, 1/4 inch strips, 3/8 inch strips, and 3/4 inch strips that the banding was already. Again, this was a tricky and potentially very dangerous process, so proceed with caution here. If you don't feel comfortable making these long cuts, look for different widths of banding. I think that 1/2 inch was the smallest width that I've seen, so I don't think it would have worked for me for this project. But if you're doing a larger table or cabinet or something, 1/2 inch might work great for you. Once all the strips I needed were cut, I was ready to stain them. I decided to use black India ink to dye the strips for the black parts of the design. Since I had it on hand from a high school art class, I'm so glad I kept this for 15 years just to use for this project. The other strips were stained in the shades Colonial Maple, which I also had on hand, and Early American. I just bought a new quart of this since it's my favorite, and I finished the last quart on the pantry crates a couple months ago. I left some pieces unstained as well for the lightest parts of the design. I let these dry overnight before getting to work on the design. My strategy here is to start from the outside in, since that's where most of the precision is in the design, and since I need to be sure that everything lines up around the edges. So I start with the 3/8 inch strips around the outside. I cut one end of the strip on a 45-degree angle using my mat. Then I place the strip of banding and iron it down mostly in the middle, leaving the ends loose. And once I feel good about the placement, I can trace over the areas that overlap and cut the angles with scissors. I find scissors to be easier than a utility knife when the banding is halfway applied, but that's just me. Then I can fiddle with it a bit, reheating the adhesive and pressing the gaps closed to achieve a clean mitered corner. Now onto the very complicated part. I started with the 1/8 inch strips, following my design and working outside in. Note that not all of my strips are perfectly the same width, so even before I stained them, I grouped the most similar pieces of each size together and used them together in the design to help me achieve symmetry and prevent things from not lining up properly. The tiny mitered corners were so tedious, but my graph design actually came in handy with knowing how big to cut each piece. Okay, this is gonna work. So let's do this. For the two-tone stripes down the center, my graph was not completely accurate in the placement of the pieces, so I started in the center of each side and worked outward, cutting the last pieces to fit if necessary. One perk of doing this myself rather than using the pre-made inlay is that I can make the design specific to the size of my table and have everything line up perfectly in the corners. And with that, the border is done. Now onto the parquet center. I wanted each area of the design to be a perfect square with 4 strips of banding. So following the math, 4 strips of banding, 3/4 inches, that's a 3-inch width. So I need the pieces to be 3 inches long to make the squares square. So I cut a bunch of 3-inch pieces and started to lay out my design. Again, I started in the center and mitered the edges where the design called for. Once I got ready to start laying things down, I totally mismarked the center and started laying everything in the wrong spot. But no worries, we can just reheat the adhesive and slide it around to get everything in the right place. That's one of the best things about this iron-on banding is that it does set right away so you're not waiting for glue to dry, but it is repositionable in case you make mistakes, because I made a lot of mistakes. I keep going here, alternating between the mitered squares and the squares with 4 parallel strips until we fill in the whole area. My inlay placement isn't totally perfect, but I think it turned out pretty freaking cool. Finally, I unscrewed the top from the table and went in with multiple coats of warm semi-gloss polyurethane to seal in the cracks and give this a more waterproof finish that would make a better tabletop. A couple tips here. I didn't film any of this because I was panicking. After I put on the first coat of polyurethane, some of the areas of the wood inlay started to lift and bubble up. I wish I had gone back on a flat surface and ironed everything really, really well after I removed it from the table base. When it was on the table base, there was a little lip around the edges and it was hard to get the iron totally flat. So be sure that if you're putting a coating on this, that you go back and iron everything really well. I had to do a mix of like ironing it afterward, but then I was using a parchment paper and that was leaving weird residue on this. And so I went back and sanded it and added more polyurethane. Also, when you're applying polyurethane with the brush, you do want to use a good soft brush for this to apply it as evenly as possible. I have a hard time wanting to do that because I have a hard time getting the brush clean afterward. And I hate ruining a good brush on a one-time project. So I started in with the crap brush here and it just gave me really deep brush strokes that were terrible. So this looked a lot better after I went in with the softer brush. So in the end, it's not perfect, but learn from my mistakes. Even better, maybe even go with the spray polyurethane to get a more even coating. I don't know, there's probably a number of things that you could do, but again, this is what I had on hand. All right, everybody, it is reveal time. I am so excited and proud of these projects. You know in my design style that I like to combine modern elements with more vintagey and traditional elements, and both of these are combining those styles into one piece. We have this very vintage chair with this really contemporary color, and then this chic modern industrial table with this beautiful traditional wood inlay. But yeah, I love the results here, and I hope you do too. Thanks so much for watching and spending some time with me and watching me turn some cool crap into cooler crap, hopefully. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have a great weekend. I'll see you guys soon.